The journey of a revolutionary, Nguyen Ai Quoc's quest for national liberation. At the dawn of the 20th century, Vietnam lay shackled under the oppressive rule of colonial powers and feudal lords. The nation's independence had been stripped away, and its people suffered under a cruel dual burden, enslaved in their own homeland, crushed by poverty, and exploited at every turn. In response, waves of patriotic uprisings surged across the land. The Can Vong movement, the Yen the insurrection, the Du Wei Tan movement led by Phan Chu Trinh, and the Dong Kinh Nha Thuc movement spearheaded by Phan Boi Chau, all burned with the same desire, to reclaim freedom and dignity for the Vietnamese people. Yet, one by one, they fell. Each rebellion, no matter how courageous, was crushed under the might of the colonizers. Among those who bore witness to these failures was a young man with a restless heart and an unwavering love for his homeland, Nguyen Tat Ton. Though he deeply respected and admired the valor of his predecessors, he could not ignore a troubling realization: the paths they had taken could not truly liberate the nation. History demanded a new course, one rooted not in outdated ideologies but in modern realities. To find that path, Nguyen Tat Ton knew he had to venture beyond Vietnam, to see firsthand how the French and other free nations had built their power, to discover the secret to national independence, and to bring that knowledge back to his suffering people. And so, on June 5, 1911, at Ben Son Nha Rong, the Dragon Wharf, Nguyen Tat Ton stood before a vast, open sea. With nothing but his dreams and determination, he boarded the Amiral La Touche Treville, a French steamer bound for the world beyond. Taking on the humble identity of Van Ba, a kitchen assistant, he stepped onto the ship not as a scholar, nor a warrior, nor a leader, but as a simple laborer, armed with nothing but his will and an unshakable belief in his mission. This was no ordinary departure. It was the first step in a perilous, extraordinary journey, one that would shape the fate of Vietnam forever. With nothing but unyielding determination and a burning dream of liberation, Nguyen Tat Ton embarked on a perilous journey across the world. His mission was clear: freedom for his people, independence for his nation. That was all he wanted. That was all he understood. As the Amiral La Touche Treville cut through the vast oceans, Van Ba, his assumed name, worked tirelessly in the ship's kitchen, enduring hardship without complaint. His hands scrubbed dishes, but his mind raced with questions. What made some nations powerful while others remained in chains? How could Vietnam break free from its oppressors? The ship docked at Singapore, then navigated through the Strait of Malacca and reached India, a land also suffering under colonial rule. But Nguyen Tat Ton's journey had only just begun. From there, the ship ventured further west, across the Horn of Africa, through the Red Sea, and into the Mediterranean, finally arriving in Marseille, France, on July 6, 1911. Stepping onto French soil for the first time, Nguyen Tat Ton saw the grandeur of his colonizers' homeland. This was the center of the empire that ruled over Vietnam. How did this nation justify its oppression? How could it preach liberty, equality, fraternity, while enslaving millions across the world? He observed everything, questioned everything, but his time in France was brief. The ship soon resumed its voyage, taking him across West Africa, where he saw firsthand the cruelty of colonial exploitation. Here, in the heart of France's African territories, Nguyen Tat Ton encountered people who shared the same suffering and humiliation as his fellow Vietnamese. Different lands, different faces, but the same oppression. His resolve only grew stronger. Leaving Africa behind, the ship sailed southward, passing the Cape of Good Hope, and then traced the eastern coast of South America. Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, one by one, the young revolutionaries saw new lands, new people, but the same struggle for dignity and justice. By December 1912, the ship finally reached the United States. Stepping onto American soil, Nguyen Tat Ton set foot in New York, a city of towering ambition and sharp contrasts. From there, he traveled to Boston, a historic hub of American independence, before returning to London in early 1913. For the next 4 years, Nguyen Ai Quoc lived in England, working various jobs while continuing his search for a revolutionary path. By late 1917, he returned to France, settling in Paris, the political heart of the empire he sought to dismantle. Then, in 1919, history changed course. The Russian October Revolution had succeeded, shaking the world's power structures. In Paris, Nguyen Ai Quoc discovered the writings of Lenin, a leader who spoke of liberation, of the overthrow of oppressors, of a world where the exploited could rise. For the first time, Nguyen Ai Quoc saw a path forward. A clear, undeniable truth crystallized in his mind: colonized nations could not rely on their oppressors for freedom, they had to seize it themselves. With newfound conviction, he took on the name that would soon become legendary: Nguyen Ai Quoc, Nguyen the Patriot. On June 18, 1919, Nguyen Ai Quoc, representing the Vietnamese people in France, boldly submitted a petition to the Versailles Peace Conference. His demands were simple yet revolutionary: freedom, democracy, and equality for the people of Annam, Vietnam. The petition was ignored. The great powers did not listen. But the world did. His words echoed beyond the conference halls, stirring discussions, igniting hope among the oppressed, and awakening a movement that would change the course of history. Though his petition was ignored, its impact was unstoppable. The words of Nguyen Ai Quoc spread like wildfire, shaking the consciousness of many in France and beyond. It was a moment of awakening, not just for him, but for oppressed peoples across the world. The Versailles Conference may have dismissed his demands, but the colonies took notice. His message resonated in the hearts of those yearning for freedom. Nguyen Ai Quoc realized a harsh truth: no colonial master would willingly grant independence. If the oppressed wanted liberation, they had to seize it with their own hands. Then, in July 1920, everything changed. While reading the first draft of Lenin's theses on national and colonial questions, published in Luminite, the newspaper of the French Socialist Party, Nguyen Ai Quoc found the answer he had been searching for. His doubts, his questions, his struggles, all vanished in an instant. The words of Lenin ignited a fire within him, bringing clarity, conviction, and an unshakable belief in revolution. I was overwhelmed with emotion, thrilled and enlightened. My faith grew stronger than ever before. I was so overjoyed that I wanted to cry. Sitting alone in my small room, I spoke aloud as if addressing a massive crowd: my suffering compatriots. This is what we need. This is our path to liberation. From that moment, Nguyen Ai Quoc fully embraced Leninism and the ideals of the Communist International. On December 30, 1920, at the Congress of Tours, Nguyen Ai Quoc made a bold choice. He sided with the revolutionary faction and cast his vote in favor of joining the Communist International, Comintern. This decision marked a turning point not only for him but for the Vietnamese independence movement. The following year, in 1921, Nguyen Ai Quoc co-founded the Union of Colonial Nations, bringing together revolutionaries from various oppressed nations under French rule. He used every platform available to expose the brutal crimes of colonialism, launching the newspaper, L'Opéria, the Pariah, a publication that became the voice of the oppressed. But it was in 1922 that his most powerful weapon against colonial rule emerged: his groundbreaking book, The Indictment of French Colonialism, Ban Enché du Tuc Dan Phap. Its words were fire. Its impact was seismic. Nguyen Ai Quoc laid bare the hypocrisy, cruelty, and exploitation of the French colonial system, revealing the ugly truth behind their so-called civilizing mission. The book circulated widely, inspiring resistance movements across Asia and Africa. By June 1923, his mission took him to the Soviet Union, the beating heart of the Communist Revolution. There, he attended the International Peasant Congress, was elected to the Executive Committee, and became a member of the Presidium. For the first time, Nguyen Ai Quoc was no longer just a lone revolutionary, he was part of a global movement dedicated to overthrowing oppression. In late 1924, his journey brought him to Guangzhou, China, a city teeming with revolutionary activity. Here, Nguyen Ai Quoc began laying the foundation for Vietnam's future liberation movement. He didn't just write about revolution, he trained the revolutionaries. His works, including The Indictment of French Colonialism and The Revolutionary Path, Duong Catch Men, became essential reading for those preparing to fight for Vietnam's independence. But more importantly, in June 1925, he launched Thanh Nien Youth newspaper, ensuring that his vision and strategy reached the next generation of freedom fighters. This was not just a newspaper, it was a call to arms, a guide to revolution, a spark that would eventually set Vietnam ablaze. Nguyen Ai Quoc was not just a revolutionary, he was a strategist, a builder of movements, a leader who understood that true change required preparation, organization, and the training of future revolutionaries. From 1925 to 1927, he focused on laying the groundwork for Vietnam's independence struggle. In Guangzhou, China, he established the Vietnamese Revolutionary Youth League, Viet Nam Thanh Nien Catch Mang Dong Chi Hoi, an organization dedicated to educating and training the next generation of revolutionaries. Through newspapers, secret gatherings, and relentless ideological work, he shaped the minds of young Vietnamese patriots, preparing them for the long and arduous fight ahead. His vision extended beyond Vietnam. He sent select cadres to the Soviet Union for advanced political and military training, ensuring that his movement had the knowledge and expertise needed to lead a full-scale revolution. But Nguyen Ai Quoc was not one to remain in one place for too long. In mid-1928, he moved to Siam, modern-day Thailand, operating under the alias Thao Chin. There, he continued underground activities, spreading revolutionary ideas among the Vietnamese diaspora and maintaining contact with his comrades back home. He knew the time was fast approaching for a unified communist movement to emerge. That moment came in early 1930. On February 3, 1930, in a small house in Kowloon, Hong Kong, a historic meeting took place. Under the leadership of Nguyen Ai Quoc, three fragmented communist factions, the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, the Annamese Communist Party, and the Indo-Chinese Communist League, merged into a single, unified force, the Communist Party of Vietnam. It was a defining moment. At the meeting, Nguyen Ai Quoc drafted and presented the party's first political platform, outlining a bold vision for independence, socialism, and national liberation. His message was clear. Workers, peasants, soldiers, students, and oppressed people of Vietnam. The road to freedom is before us. Our enemy is strong, but our will is stronger. Stand together and fight for a Vietnam free from colonial rule. This was more than just words, it was a declaration of war against the French colonial regime. In October 1930, the party was renamed the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, Dang Song San Dong Duong, solidifying its role as the vanguard of the Vietnamese independence movement. It quickly took action, igniting a wave of revolutionary uprisings across the country. The first great test came in 1930 to 1931, the Soviet Nha Tin uprising. In the heartlands of Nha and Ha Tin provinces, thousands of peasants, workers, and revolutionaries rose up against the colonial administration, forming self-governing Soviets, the first revolutionary government in Vietnam's modern history. For a brief, shining moment, they lived free. But the French struck back with brutal force. Planes bombed villages, soldiers massacred civilians, and thousands of revolutionaries were executed or imprisoned. The rebellion was crushed, but its legacy endured. The uprising served as the first major rehearsal for the larger revolution that would come in 1945. Nguyen Ai Quoc, from exile, watched as his movement gained momentum. But the price of revolution was high. In June 1931, operating under the alias Tong Van So, Nguyen Ai Quoc was captured by British authorities in Hong Kong at the request of the French. He was imprisoned, interrogated, and faced the real possibility of execution. For over a year, he endured the hardships of prison, but he never broke. Then, on December 28, 1932, a miracle, he was released. The revolution was not over. It was just beginning. He resurfaced in Moscow in 1934, under the name Lin, and continued his work within the Communist International. From exile, he continued shaping the movement, learning from past failures, and preparing for the battles to come. From 1935 to 1938, Nguyen Ai Quoc, now a seasoned revolutionary, continued his studies at the Lenin International School in Moscow. However, due to political changes and suspicions within the Communist International, he was forced to remain in the Soviet Union under close observation. But Nguyen Ai Quoc was never one to stay idle. By late 1938, he had managed to leave the Soviet Union, making his way back to China, this time, under a new identity. He adopted the alias Ho Quang and served as a major in the 8th Route Army, a unit of the Chinese Communist Forces. Stationed in Guilin, Giang, and later Kunming, he worked closely with the Chinese Communist Party, gaining valuable military insights that would later shape Vietnam's independence movement. Then, in the harsh winter of 1938, Nguyen Ai Quoc made his way to Yan'an, the heart of the Chinese Communist Revolution. There, he studied guerrilla warfare tactics and further refined his revolutionary strategy. Every step he took, every lesson he learned, was preparing him for one thing, his return to Vietnam. And then, on January 28, 1941, after 30 long years of exile, he crossed the border at milestone 108, stepping onto Vietnamese soil once again. Disguised as an old man under the alias Gia Thursday, he arrived at Pac Bua, a remote village in Chao Bang province. In a small cave by a clear mountain stream, he set up his base, a place that would soon become the command center of the Vietnamese independence movement. Here, he walked among his people, listened to their struggles, and began to build the foundation for a full-scale revolution. By May 1941, he convened the 8th Central Committee Conference of the Communist Party of Vietnam in Quy Nam, Pac Bua. It was here that he formally established the Viet Minh, League for the Independence of Vietnam, a national front that would unite workers, peasants, intellectuals, and all patriotic forces in the struggle against French colonial rule and Japanese occupation. Vietnam was on the brink of change, and Ho Chi Minh knew that the time for action had come. In August 1942, under the name Ho Chi Minh, he traveled to China once more, seeking international alliances to support the Vietnamese resistance. However, fate had other plans. He was captured by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces and imprisoned for 13 months in Guangxi province. Locked behind bars, subjected to harsh conditions, and constantly moved from one prison to another, Ho Chi Minh did not break. Instead, he turned his suffering into poetry, composing the now famous collection, Prison Diary, Nguk Trung Nhat Khai, a testament to his unshakable spirit. Finally, in September 1943, after over a year of captivity, he was released. With renewed determination, Ho Chi Minh made his way back to Chao Bang in September 1944, where he immediately resumed preparations for the final struggle. By May 1945, with the tides of World War II turning against Japan, he moved his headquarters to Tan Treo, Tuan Quang, where the Provisional Revolutionary Government was established, with Ho Chi Minh as its leader. Then, in August 1945, the moment history had been waiting for arrived. The Viet Minh launched a nationwide uprising, seizing control from Japanese and French forces. The people, weary of war and oppression, rallied behind Ho Chi Minh's call to arms. By the end of August, the last emperor of Vietnam, Bao Dai, was forced to abdicate, marking the end of feudal rule. And on September 2, 1945, in Ba Dinh Square, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh stood before tens of thousands of his fellow countrymen and declared the birth of a new nation. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Citing the American Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, Ho Chi Minh proclaimed to the world the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Vietnam was free, at least, for now. But Ho Chi Minh knew that the battle was far from over. On September 2, 1945, in the heart of Ba Dinh Square, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh stood before a sea of people. The air was thick with anticipation as he solemnly declared the birth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Quoting the American Declaration of Independence, Ho Chi Minh made it clear, Vietnam had cast off the chains of colonial rule. The people were no longer subjects of an empire, they were citizens of a free nation. But freedom, as history has shown time and time again, comes at a cost. Even as Vietnam celebrated its newfound independence, a new threat loomed on the horizon. The United States, with its imperial ambitions, sought to turn southern Vietnam into a puppet state, dividing the country in an attempt to control it. Yet, Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese people held firm to a singular truth. Vietnam is one. The Vietnamese people are one. Rivers may dry, mountains may erode, but this truth will never change. And so, under the guiding leadership of the Communist Party, the nation was thrust into a war for survival. In 1954, at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the Vietnamese forces, outnumbered, outgunned, but never outwilled, shattered the might of the French colonial army. It was a victory so monumental that it echoed across the world, shaking the very foundation of colonial rule. But the fight was not over. Divided by the Geneva Accords, Vietnam stood as a nation torn in two, with the North striving for independence while the South remained under foreign influence. Then, in the historic Spring Offensive of 1975, after decades of relentless struggle, the Vietnamese people rose up in one final, decisive push. Saigon fell. The puppet regime crumbled. And at last, Vietnam was whole again. The victory of April 30, 1975, was not just a military triumph, it was the culmination of generations of sacrifice, resilience, and an unbreakable will for self-determination. With the nation reunited, a new chapter began, a journey toward rebuilding, toward peace, toward socialism.